Jack Reynolds, a 79-year-old Vietnam veteran with silver hair, a quiet demeanor, and a bronze star pinned proudly to his old jacket, never expected trouble when he walked into the North Point Public Service office that morning. The building was just a routine stop update. Pension papers handle paperwork, nothing more. But in the crowded lobby filled with distracted staff and restless customers, one careless young clerk decided Jack's medal was against policy and reached across the counter to rip it off his chest. The room fell silent, stunned by the arrogance. Jack, shaken but dignified, stepped outside alone, his torn jacket fluttering slightly in the breeze. 5 minutes later, the doors swung open again, but this time it wasn't Jack returning. It was his son, Lieutenant Colonel Sam Reynolds, flanked by 2 master sergeants, all in full uniform. Walking into that office with the calm authority of men who knew exactly what respect meant and were ready to teach a lesson no one inside would ever forget. What followed wasn't just a personal reckoning. It became a viral moment that swept across social media, veteran communities, and national news, sparking conversations everywhere about honor, dignity, and the power of standing up for what's right. Before we dive into this powerful story, tell us, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments, and if you believe some values are worth defending, make sure to stay with us to the end. This is a story you won't want to miss. At exactly 10 a.m., the North Point Public Service office buzzed with the restless energy of another bureaucratic morning. Phones rang softly behind glass partitions, keyboards clicked in staccato rhythm, and the line of citizens waiting for assistance stretched back to the door. Near the front stood Jack Reynolds, 79 years old, back straight. Despite the stiffness in his knees, dressed in a plain gray jacket, carefully buttoned its lapel, bearing a bronze star that had been polished with quiet pride. He waited patiently, holding a manila folder with documents for his pension update, shifting slightly on his feet as the automated voice called out, "Now serving number 73. Jack stepped forward. Behind the reception desk sat Kyle, a young man of maybe 22, slouched in his chair, his badge tilted sideways, earbuds tucked halfway into one ear, despite workplace rules. His eyes flicked up briefly from the screen of his phone. "Morning," Kyle mumbled flatly, not making real eye contact. "What are you here for?" "Sir Jack." Smiled politely, his voice steady but gentle. "Just need to update some pension records. They told me to bring my discharge papers and the verification letter." He handed over the folder carefully. Kyle took it with one hand, flipping it open without enthusiasm. His other hand absent-mindedly tapped his phone screen under the counter. "All right," Kyle muttered, scrolling through the form. "Give me a sec, old man." Jack's smile faded slightly, but he said nothing, accustomed to being dismissed by youth who didn't know or care about the past. As Kyle continued skimming, his eyes drifted back to Jack's chest. His brow creased. "What's that thing on your jacket?" he asked suddenly, gesturing vaguely. Jack glanced down. "Oh," he said simply, "it's a bronze star." Kyle squinted. "A bronze what?" Jack met his gaze directly, his tone calm. "It's a military decoration. I earned it back in Vietnam." Kyle let out a sharp little laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah, okay, Grandpa. Well, that's cool and all, but you can't wear that here." Jack blinked, surprised. "Excuse me?" Kyle gestured again, this time more pointedly. "We have a strict no-symbol policy, sir. No pins, no badges, no political buttons, no flags. You'll need to remove it if you want to continue." Jack's face stiffened. "It's not a political button," he said evenly. "It's a service medal." Kyle sighed dramatically, leaning back in his chair. "Look, I don't make the rules. You can't just come in here flashing stuff like that trying to make a statement. This is a public office neutral space company policy." Jack drew a slow breath, keeping his voice measured. "Young man, I'm not making a statement. I'm wearing a medal I earned for service to this country." Kyle rolled his eyes, pushing his chair back slightly. "Yeah, sure, okay, but you still need to take it off. We gotta maintain a consistent environment here." Jack's mouth tightened, his fingers twitching slightly at his side. "I'm not removing it," he said softly but firmly. Kyle's posture shifted. "Look, sir, we don't want any trouble," he said, his tone sharpening. "Just comply, and we can move on." Jack straightened his shoulders. "I fought in a war," he said quietly. And I didn't back down there. I'm certainly not going to back down over a medal in an office lobby. For a split second, their eyes locked, and something in Kyle's expression flickered, a mix of annoyance and something meaner, something eager to prove dominance. Then suddenly, before Jack could react, Kyle reached across the counter, fingers darting out, and yanked. The tearing sound was loud, violent. The metal's pin ripped through the jacket fabric, leaving a jagged hole. The bronze star, dulled by decades but bright with meaning, clattered to the floor. Jack froze, staring in stunned silence, as Kyle smirked, tossing the shredded pin back onto the counter casually. Their problem solved, Kyle said, his voice light, almost mocking. Around them, the office had fallen dead silent. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, the low hum of background noise evaporating. A woman near the waiting area covered her mouth with one hand. A man farther back let his coffee hover just above his lips, eyes wide. Near the back of the line, a teenage girl instinctively pulled out her phone, thumbing the record button with a murmured, "Oh man, if this hits the internet." Jack's hands trembled slightly as he bent down, picking up the metal from the floor. His face was set, his jaw clenched, but he spoke no words. He pressed the broken metal tightly in his fist, feeling its weight, its history, its pain. Without another glance at Kyle, he turned his boots, slow but deliberate, against the tile floor. The silence parted around him as he walked through the room, heads turning, eyes following, whispers just beginning to rise. But Jack heard none of it. His mind was elsewhere, a sharp, simmering anger stirring in his chest, the kind of anger that wasn't loud or reckless but cold and focused. As he stepped outside into the sharp chill of the morning air, he sank onto the metal bench just beside the entrance. His fingers fumbled in his pocket for his phone. Jack Reynolds knew exactly who he needed to call. Jack sat heavily on the metal bench just outside the glass doors of the North Point Public Service office, his breath still uneven as he pulled his phone from his pocket. His fingers, calloused and aged, hovered briefly over the screen before he tapped the contact he rarely called, Sam Reynolds. His son, a 38-year-old Army lieutenant colonel. For a moment, Jack stared at the phone, his thumb hesitating over the call button, a swirl of emotion tightening in his chest. He had fought battles both on the field and in his own life, but making this call felt unexpectedly heavy. Still with a clenched jaw, he hit dial. The phone rang only twice before Sam answered, his voice sharp unmistakably. "Military Colonel Reynolds," he said briskly. Jack swallowed, his own voice rough when he spoke. "Sam, it's Dad." There was a pause, just a heartbeat, and then Sam's tone softened by a degree. "Dad, are you all right? What's going on?" Jack pressed the metal tightly between his fingers, feeling the jagged edge where the pin had snapped. He forced himself to keep his voice steady. "I was just at the public office, the one downtown. I was trying to process the pension forms. The clerk, he ripped my medal off, said it wasn't allowed, on the other end of the line." There was no immediate response, just a heavy, charged silence. Jack continued the words, pushing past his tightening throat. He tore it right off Sam. Like it was nothing. Like it didn't mean anything. His voice cracked slightly, the anger trembling just beneath the surface. Sam exhaled slowly, and when he spoke again, his voice was a different thing entirely. Cold, controlled, steeled with purpose. "Dad, listen carefully. Are you still outside the building?" Jack nodded reflexively, though his son couldn't see. "Yes, I'm on the bench near the parking lot." Sam's words came clipped and precise. "Good. Stay there. Do not go back inside. Do not speak to anyone. I am coming, and I am not coming alone." Jack's heart gave a small, hard thump in his chest. He knew that voice, knew that tone. It was the same one Sam used when briefing troops, the same edge that meant action was already in motion. Jack let out a shaky breath as the line went dead. Meanwhile, inside the office, things were no longer as quiet as they had been. Emma, the 19-year-old college student who had instinctively recorded the incident on her phone, sat cross-legged near the corner, her fingers flying across the screen. The video she had captured from the moment the clerk sneered to the brutal rip of the metal was already posted on her social media feed. She hadn't expected much. Maybe a few friends would comment, maybe a couple of strangers would chime in. But as Jack sat alone outside trying to steady his pulse, the online world was lighting up. Notifications poured in faster than Emma could read them, shares comments, reposts, reactions. The number of views ticked upward by the hundreds, then thousands. A popular comment under the clip read simply, "This dude's about to find out who he messed with." Another user posted, "Someone tag the news, this is gonna blow up," unaware of the virtual wildfire now attached to his name. Jack stared down at the metal in his hands. He traced the edge of the bronze star with his thumb, his mind flashing back to younger days, to the jungle, to the heat and noise and chaos of war. He had faced down fear before, but this felt different. This was a confrontation born not of survival, but of dignity. He felt both anxious and oddly expectant. His phone buzzed again, briefly pulling his attention. He glanced at the screen, and his eyes widened slightly. Messages from old army buddies, names he hadn't seen, pop up in years, began arriving one by one. "Jack, is this you in the video? Just saw you on Emma's page, you okay? You need backup, old man." Jack blinked, a dry laugh escaping. Despite himself, he had never imagined that one quiet, humiliating moment at a service desk could ripple outward like this, stirring an entire unseen network of people ready to stand behind him. He leaned back against the bench, feeling the cool metal under his shoulders, and gazed toward the parking lot. His pulse still thudded, but now a different kind of energy coursed through him, a mix of nervousness, anticipation, and something like fierce, quiet pride. He had called his son, and Sam was coming. Not alone. Jack had no idea what that would look like, but he trusted it would make an impact. The faint hum of his phone drew his eyes again. On the corner of the screen, a small notification blinked. The video Emma had posted had crossed 50,000 views. Jack's brows lifted slightly. 50,000 people watching, commenting, sharing. A sudden wave of adrenaline prickled under his skin. He felt both uneasy and hopeful, aware that something larger had been set in motion, something he had not intended, but now could not stop. As he sat there, shoulders hunched slightly against the cool breeze, his eyes remained fixed on the parking lot entrance. He knew that when Sam arrived, the dynamic inside that office was going to change. Jack adjusted his grip on the metal, exhaling slowly as the weight of the moment settled on him. The shares were still climbing, the comments still pouring in, but all Jack could think was, "My son is on his way." And just 5 minutes later, the sound of heavy, deliberate boots crossing the lobby signaled that everything inside was about to change. Jack's eyes stayed locked on the office entrance as the steady rhythm of the parking lot traffic blurred around him. His fingers tightened around the metal resting in his palm, feeling the familiar cold edge press into his skin. A faint chill traced up his spine, but it wasn't the wind. It was the moment stretching, tightening like a coiled spring. Then, without fanfare, the glass doors of the North Point Public Service Office slid open. 3 figures stepped inside. Lieutenant Colonel Sam Reynolds led the way, his army dress uniform immaculate, the silver oak leaves of his rank gleaming against his shoulders. His face was unreadable, jaw tight, eyes cold and focused. On either side of him walked Master Sergeant Collins and Master Sergeant Brooks, both in full service uniforms, their polished black shoes clicking sharply against the floor with each measured step. Without a word, they moved in unison across the lobby, their presence cutting a clean line through the low murmur of the office. Inside, phones rang softly. Keyboards clicked as staff worked through paperwork, and the low hum of conversation floated through the air. But the moment the soldiers crossed the threshold, something shifted. The receptionist nearest the door paused, mouth slightly open, watching as the trio advanced. A man waiting in line lowered his newspaper. A mother juggling paperwork and a toddler froze mid-motion, eyes wide. The atmosphere thickened, voices dimmed, and a hush rippled outward like a silent wave. Kyle, still at the front desk, leaned lazily on the counter, scrolling his phone. His head lifted lazily when the shadows fell across the desk, his mouth ready to bark out another command. But then his eyes locked onto the uniformed figures closing in on him, and whatever words had been forming caught hard in his throat. His smug expression collapsed into stunned disbelief. his mouth half-open eyes darting between Sam's sharp glare and the towering presence of the two master sergeants at his flanks. From the corner of the room, Emma, still live-streaming with wide, excited eyes, whispered breathlessly to her viewers, "Oh my God, that's the soldier's son, isn't it? That's the old man's son from earlier." Her voice trembled slightly, the camera wobbling in her hand as the realization hit her, and likely tens of thousands of watchers following the live feed. Sam didn't stop to look around, didn't acknowledge the stares or the spreading whispers. His focus was narrow, cutting straight through the noise, straight to Kyle. Behind him, Collins and Brooks mirrored his every step, their faces carved in stone, their eyes fixed dead ahead. They moved with the precise control of men used to walking into tense rooms and commanding them without ever raising their voices. At the far side of the office, Mr. Henderson, the manager, came rushing out of his office, his suit jacket rumpled and his face pale. He took in the sight of the soldiers striding into his front lobby, and visibly paled further, his mouth working silently as he stumbled toward the desk. The tension in the room was suffocating, every eye drawn to the quiet but unmistakable confrontation brewing at the front counter. Kyle took a small, uncertain step back, his hands lifting slightly, as if to ward off some invisible force. His lips parted, trying to find words, but none came. His fingers twitched nervously at his side, his earlier arrogance evaporating in the face of the rigid, unwavering soldiers now towering in front of him. Sam came to a halt, his boots making a final firm sound against the tile. He stood squarely at the desk directly across from Kyle, his gaze locked and unflinching. Collins and Brooks positioned themselves slightly behind, and to the sides their chins lifted, their posture exact. Without so much as a glance at the murmuring crowd, Sam slowly set his cap down on the counter, his hands folded carefully in front of him, his expression calm, but ice-cold. Kyle swallowed hard, the color draining from his face. Henderson, breathless and wide-eyed, reached the desk, just as Sam's sharp, measured voice cut through the silence. The air in the room seemed to compress, the thin noise of the office dying completely under the weight of the unspoken question filling the space. What happens now? Emma, still filming, shifted slightly, zooming in on the soldiers' faces. Her voice, a bare whisper into her microphone, trembled with a mixture of awe and glee. "You guys, this is going to blow up. Watch closely. This is about to get serious." Every employee, every customer, every person sitting quietly in the waiting room held their breath as the tension thickened like fog. The moment hung heavy, balanced on the edge of what was about to unfold. And then, with absolute clarity, Sam raised his eyes to Kyle. His jaw set, his voice low and controlled. He was ready to speak. Sam's voice was about to break the silence when Kyle's breath hitched audibly, his body stiffening as if realizing the storm he was now standing in. The front lobby was no longer a place of routine paperwork and quiet chatter. It had transformed into a charged arena where every gaze, every camera lens, and every breath was locked onto the exchange unfolding at the reception desk. Sam's eyes stayed fixed, and when he spoke, his words cut through the heavy air with sharp clarity. "Are you the one who disrespected my father?" Kyle's mouth opened, his face. "Pale, sir, I think there's some misunderstanding here," he stammered, his hands lifting slightly, his voice cracking under the weight of the question. Henderson, the office manager, hurried to Kyle's side, his forehead damp with sweat, his hands raised as if to calm the moment. "Colonel Reynolds, please, let's keep things civil. I'm sure this is just a Sam didn't give him the space to finish." With a single motion, he extended his hand toward Master Sergeant Collins, who stepped forward silently, raising his phone screen. On it played a video, not just any video, but the very recording captured earlier by the teenage girl in the corner. Emma, whose live stream was now drawing in tens of thousands of online viewers. The footage was unmistakable. Kyle's face in clear profile, his hand reaching the fabric, tearing the glint of the bronze star falling Jack's stunned face. No one spoke as the brief clip looped silently, but the ripple through the crowd was immediate. "That's him," someone whispered near the back. "He's been caught," another voice murmured, disbelief and recognition weaving together. Kyle's face twitched, a desperate flicker passing through his eyes. I didn't mean for it to," he sputtered. But Sam raised a single finger, the signal clear. Stop. The sheer authority behind the gesture was enough to freeze Kyle in place. Collins slipped the phone away without a word, stepping back beside Brooks. Emma, still capturing everything, whispered excitedly to her live stream. He can't deny it now, they have the proof. Comments flooded her screen, emojis and reactions scrolling so fast she could barely keep up. Henderson swallowed hard, adjusting his glasses nervously. Colonel, I'm sure we can sort this out. There's got to be an explanation. Maybe the footage is incomplete or taken out of context. His words trailed off weakly under the cold weight of Sam's unwavering gaze. The lobby seemed to shrink, the edges of the room pressing inward as the pressure mounted. Employees had stopped working, customers had stopped fidgeting, and all eyes now fixed on the front. Yet Sam didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The evidence had already spoken louder than any accusation. Kyle's shoulders sagged slightly, his hands clenching into shaky fists at his sides. His mouth opened once more, perhaps to plead or defend or offer some hasty excuse, but no sound came out. For the first time since Sam entered, Kyle seemed to realize fully where he stood, not just in front of a customer or a soldier, but in front of a man whose patience had already been tested past its limit. A single phrase floated through the hushed crowd. A murmur passed between two onlookers close to the wall. He got caught red-handed. The words carried, whispered but clear, slicing through the stagnant air like a blade. Sam finally shifted his voice low and controlled. Manager Henderson, I will hear your explanation shortly, but first your employee has something to say. His head tilted slightly, eyes fixed on Kyle. To my father. The tension spiked every body in the room, frozen in place, waiting for the next moment. Henderson licked his lips, his hands wringing nervously, eyes flicking between Sam and Kyle, hoping against hope to de-escalate what could no longer be buried under polite apologies. Sam had not raised his voice once, but the atmosphere was one of complete control, the kind that didn't need yelling to command a room. And now, with the crowd leaning forward, the phones still recording, and the weight of the evidence irrefutable, there was only one path forward. Henderson, nearly whispering, urged softly, Kyle, maybe it's best you address the issue directly. The words hung brittle and uncertain. Kyle's face twitched, his lips pressing into a thin line. His eyes darted sideways, searching for escape, but there was none. Outside, unseen by Kyle, Jack was still seated quietly, watching through the window, metal clenched gently in his hand. His heart beat steady, his breath held as he waited for what was about to unfold. Inside the moment when his son would finish what he had started. Before Kyle could stammer out anything more, the room shifted subtly. The doors at the front opened again, and Jack Reynolds entered, his steps steady. Despite the stiffness in his back, his torn jacket straightened as much as possible. Master Sergeant Brooks walked just behind him, a firm but respectful hand, ready near Jack's elbow, should he need it. The sight of the elderly veteran stepping into the tense space made the crowd part almost instinctively. Conversations died mid-whisper, heads turned sharply, and the quiet buzz of the office vanished under the weight of his presence. Sam noticed his father's approach out of the corner of his eye, but didn't turn yet. His focus remained on Henderson, who had begun speaking in a shaky, almost pleading tone. Colonel Reynolds, with all due respect, perhaps we can view this as an isolated mistake. The actions of one employee should not reflect the values of our entire office. We pride ourselves on professionalism, and we deeply regret if Mr. Reynolds felt Sam's voice sliced through calm but unyielding. No one word firm, as iron stopped Henderson in his tracks. Sam's jaw tightened slightly as he continued. This is not just about one man's mistake. This is about the culture you have allowed to thrive here, when someone feels empowered to rip a veteran's medal off his chest in front of a room full of staff and customers, and no one intervenes. That is not an accident. That is the environment you lead. The words hung in the air like the tolling of a bell, sharp and impossible to ignore. Henderson opened his mouth, closed it again, and visibly wilted under the weight of the accusation. His hands twitched helplessly at his sides. Kyle, still standing awkwardly behind the counter, let out a scoffing sound under his breath. "It's just a pin," he muttered, his voice low, but not low enough. "You're all acting like it's the end of the world or something." Before anyone else could react, a new voice entered the space, rougher, older, but carrying its own quiet authority. You call it what? Kyle's head snapped up, startled, and the crowd instinctively turned to look. There stood Jack, his shoulders squared despite the frayed tear at his chest, the bronze star now cradled carefully in his hand. His voice was low, but the sharp edge in his tone could have cut glass. "You call this just a pin?" The room collectively held its breath. The tension, already high, ratcheted up another notch as the gravity of Jack's words settled over them. Even the people watching from the back, those who had only come in to renew a license or file paperwork, now leaned forward, eyes locked on the quiet confrontation unfolding before them. Sam slowly turned his head, his sharp gaze softening slightly as it met his father's eyes. He gave the faintest of nods, a gesture, not of command, but of solidarity, of acknowledgement. Jack straightened his fingers, wrapping gently but firmly around the metal, and his voice carried a clarity that made the walls themselves seem to listen. The room was utterly still. Everyone waiting breath caught in their throats to see what would come next. Jack stepped forward slowly, the sound of his shoes faint on the polished floor, but to those watching it was as if every step echoed. His shoulders were pulled back despite the rip in his jacket, the bronze star held gently in his hand. He stopped in the middle of the room, where the air felt thick and heavy, and lifted his chin slightly, his eyes sweeping over the silent crowd. For a long moment he said nothing, just stood there as though measuring the weight of the moment. Then, in a voice low and steady, he spoke. "This metal," Jack began holding the bronze star up so it caught the light, "is not a decoration, it's not a prop, it's not something to show off or pin on like a novelty." His gaze moved deliberately, shifting from one face to another, stopping on Kyle, who had shrunk back a step behind the counter. "This represents the lives of men who never came home. It represents nights when I wondered if I would live to see another sunrise. It represents sacrifice. You have clearly never even tried to understand." The crowd stayed utterly still, not a shuffle or cough among them, every eye fixed on the elderly veteran standing calmly in the center. Kyle's mouth twitched, his jaw working as though he wanted to interrupt, to push back, to reclaim even a scrap of the arrogance he had shown earlier. His shoulders lifted slightly, his lips parting, but then Sam's gaze snapped to him, sharp, commanding, cold as steel. The two men locked eyes for a fraction of a second, and Kyle visibly wilted, the words dying in his throat before they could form. His head dropped slightly, and his fists clenched uselessly at his sides. Near the back of the room, Emma struggled to keep her phone steady as she streamed the unfolding scene live. Her hands trembled slightly, her breath catching in her chest. Into her microphone she whispered almost to herself, "He's not weak. He's not weak at all. He's stronger than any of us thought." The comment feed on her screen flooded with reactions, emojis, and words of support, but Emma's eyes stayed locked on Jack. She couldn't tear her attention away. Jack let his arm drop slightly, his hand still resting protectively over the metal. His breathing was slow, measured, but his presence filled the room more powerfully than if he had shouted. He turned just slightly, his eyes meeting Sam's, and for the first time in this entire confrontation, a flicker of something unspoken passed between them. Respect, understanding the quiet bond of two men who had seen hard things and survived them. Without breaking eye contact with his father, Sam shifted his stance and finally turned his full attention to Henderson, his voice dropping into a tone that brooked no argument. "Now," Sam said smoothly, his eyes narrowing slightly, "I want to hear your explanation." The crowd collectively inhaled, the tension winding even tighter as all attention snapped to the manager standing pale and shaking near the counter. Henderson's office was a cramped space tucked behind the front lobby, separated only by a wide glass wall that gave a perfect view of the tense scene unfolding outside. As Sam Reynolds stepped through the doorway, flanked by Master Sergeant Collins and Master Sergeant Brooks, Henderson backed up instinctively, his hands raised in a defensive gesture, sweat already glistening along his forehead. His office, usually a place where small workplace grievances were settled, quietly, had suddenly become the focal point of something much larger, something slipping rapidly out of his control. Colonel Reynolds Henderson began his voice quivering as he tried to summon the smooth authority of a manager. I want to first express how deeply sorry we are. What happened out there was, well, completely unacceptable. I can assure you we had no idea Mr. Kyle would act that way. He's a young employee, barely trained, and obviously acted out of line. We will discipline him immediately. Please understand, this was his personal mistake. Sam didn't sit. He didn't even blink. He remained standing, his back straight, his gaze steady and cold. Collins and Brooks mirrored his posture, their broad frames quietly filling the office space. Sam's voice came out low, almost conversational, but with a steel edge that left no room for misunderstanding. "No, Mr. Henderson," Sam said slowly, his words deliberate. "This is not just one man's mistake. This is the culture you've allowed in this office. You cannot blame this on a single employee and wipe your hands clean." Henderson swallowed hard, trying to smile, trying to maneuver his way back into control. "Colonel, Of course, we take responsibility for maintaining a professional environment. We certainly don't condone disrespect. But you have to understand sometimes, young people." Sam's hand lifted slightly, palm facing outward. "The universal signal, stop." Henderson's voice faltered, cut off by the silent command. Sam's eyes darkened as he leaned forward just slightly, not aggressively, but with a subtle shift that made the air in the office tighten. "I am not here for excuses," Sam continued calmly. "I want to know what corrective actions you intend to take, not just against one employee, but to ensure that no veteran, no citizen is ever treated this way again in your establishment." Behind Sam, Brooks took a single step forward, his voice even deeper, rougher, carrying the weight of a man used to delivering ultimatums. "We have enough evidence right now," Brooks said simply, "to take this to the press, to veteran organizations, to social media, and make sure this office's name is known across the state for all the wrong reasons." Henderson's face visibly drained of color. His hands twitched at his sides, his mouth opening and closing helplessly as he glanced quickly toward his desk, where his phone sat. "Please," Henderson said hurriedly, his words tumbling over each other. "There's no need to escalate. We can resolve this internally. I'm sure I'll call corporate right now. We'll get a statement ready. We'll arrange a formal apology. We'll set up training. Veteran sensitivity workshops. Whatever you require." Sam said nothing. He simply watched the faintest trace of a raised eyebrow, suggesting that he was waiting, expecting, and would accept nothing less. Henderson turned quickly, snatching up his phone, his fingers fumbling across the screen as he began dialing frantically. His breath came faster, shallow as he muttered into the line. "Yes, I need to speak to regional leadership right now. No, tell them it's urgent." His eyes flicked nervously back toward the three soldiers in his office. His lips pressed tight as he realized just how far over his head he was. In the reflection on the glass, Henderson could see the waiting room still frozen in attention, the staff standing uncertainly behind their desks, the customers whispering quietly among themselves. Outside, Jack Reynolds remained seated, his figure upright and calm, watching everything unfold. For Henderson, the realization settled in painfully. This wasn't a small, local embarrassment anymore. This was a moment of public reckoning, and he was standing at the very center of it. Brooks folded his arms across his chest, glancing at Collins with a small nod. Collins gave the faintest smile, not one of amusement but of grim recognition. They had seen this type of scene play out before, someone in power trying to scramble out of a situation long after the damage had already been done. Sam, however, didn't move. He remained perfectly still, letting the manager's panic hang in the room. Henderson wiped his forehead quickly with the back of his hand, his voice still racing into the phone. Yes, yes, Colonel Reynolds is here in my office right now. No, sir, this is very serious. We need immediate authorization for yes, everything. Compensation, formal apologies, whatever is necessary. As the conversation behind the glass continued, the customers in the lobby exchanged glances, some whispering, some still glued to their phones, watching Emma's live stream feed, which had now ballooned into hundreds of thousands of viewers. Comments poured in by the second, "This manager's done for, they better pay up." Honor isn't optional. The air in the room was heavy, not just with tension, but with the undeniable realization that the usual rules, the usual evasions and corporate speak were no longer going to work here. Henderson understood it. Sam knew it, and the soldiers standing quietly at Sam's side had come prepared for exactly this moment. As Henderson gripped the phone tighter, his voice cracking slightly, Sam remained composed, waiting for the manager to realize one final truth. There would be no walking away from this without taking real responsibility. And as Henderson's hand shook ever so slightly while holding the receiver, he began to understand deep in his chest that the conversation he was having now was no longer just about saving face. It was about preventing his entire office, and maybe his own career, from crumbling under the weight of public and military fury. Without looking away, Sam spoke softly, a quiet warning laced beneath the calm. "Make sure they understand, Mr. Henderson," he said. "We are not here to negotiate. We are here to set things right." The call between Henderson and his regional supervisor continued, but Sam's patience had limits. He shifted his stance slightly, and though his voice remained calm, it sharpened with unmistakable authority. "Mr. Henderson, while you're waiting on corporate approval, I suggest you begin outlining your immediate actions. We're not here for empty promises or vague reassurances." Henderson's hand trembled slightly as he pressed the phone tighter to his ear. "Yes, yes, I understand," he whispered urgently into the line. His eyes darted nervously toward Sam. "They're demanding a formal plan, yes. They're still here." "No, I can't get them to leave." Collins crossed his arms, his face unreadable, while Brooks took a measured step forward, his presence radiating quiet strength. "I'll be very clear, sir," Brooks said in his deep, gravelly voice. "This is not just a local embarrassment anymore. The video evidence is circulating. Public attention is already building. If you think you can stall or smooth this over quietly, you are mistaken." Henderson wiped his forehead with his sleeve, his breathing growing shallower. His voice cracked slightly as he spoke back into the phone. "Yes, I know the optics. Yes, it's bad. They're saying they have witnesses. They have footage. Yes, I understand this is urgent." Through the glass wall, Sam could see Jack still seated calmly in the waiting room, his medal now resting in his lap, his hand lightly tracing its edge. Sam's jaw tightened slightly. His father had spent decades carrying the weight of that medal quietly, humbly. Sam had no intention of allowing it to be disrespected, not by a careless employee, not by a negligent manager, not by any system trying to dodge accountability. Henderson hung up the phone with a shaky sigh, turning back toward Sam Collins and Brooks. We are prepared to offer your father a formal written apology," he began, voice tight, "and we will of course waive any service fees or future charges related to his account here. Additionally, I will personally arrange a meeting with corporate leadership to review staff conduct and implement veteran sensitivity training across all local offices." Sam gave a slow, deliberate nod, his eyes fixed on Henderson's face, watching every flicker of discomfort and calculation. "Good," Sam said quietly. "But understand this, the apology is not just a formality. It will be delivered directly face-to-face by your highest local representative, and your staff will be briefed on why this happened, not just how to avoid bad press. You need to rebuild the respect that should have existed here from the start." Henderson nodded rapidly, his hands wringing together. "Yes, yes, absolutely. We can make that happen. I'll coordinate everything personally." Brooks raised one eyebrow slightly, his voice low but unmistakably firm. "And let's not forget the broader audience. We are prepared to involve veteran groups and media contacts. If there is any sign of backpedaling after we walk out of this room, do not make the mistake of thinking this conversation ends here. For a long, tense beat, Henderson could only nod the magnitude of the moment, sinking deeper into his strained expression. The manager's shoulders slumped slightly as the realization settled on him. Fully, the soldiers standing before him were not here just as angry relatives. They were here as representatives of something much larger, a living, breathing standard of honor and discipline that did not tolerate excuses. Sam's voice softened only slightly as he delivered the final point. Now he said, "You're going to walk with me back out there, and you're going to address my father directly. No intermediaries, no passing the blame, and after that you will begin cleaning up the culture of this office." Henderson's lips parted in a weak attempt to argue, but Sam's gaze pinned him instantly in place. With a resigned nod, Henderson let out a shallow breath, straightened his rumpled jacket, and prepared to follow. Outside in the lobby, the crowd was still gathered, some whispering, some glued to their phones watching as Emma's live stream continued to pull in hundreds of thousands of viewers. The tension had shifted slightly, no longer the sharp edge of confrontation, but the heavy pause of waiting for resolution. Jack, sitting quietly, noticed the movement behind the glass. His eyes lifted steady and calm as his son reappeared, followed closely by Henderson, whose face was pale and drawn. Sam met his father's gaze with a quiet nod, the signal that things were moving forward, that the reckoning was not finished. But the momentum was now firmly on their side. The master sergeants flanked Henderson as they crossed back into the main lobby, the hush in the room thickening once again as the crowd leaned forward, eager to witness what came next. The hook was clear in the air, in the faces of everyone watching, in the thousands of comments flying across the live stream. This was the moment of truth, and no one was going to look away. As the tension in the office reached its peak, Henderson stepped forward, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly as he smoothed his jacket and approached Jack behind him. Kyle followed hesitantly, shoulders slumped, eyes downcast, his earlier swagger crushed under the weight of everything that had unfolded. The customers and staff had drawn back to create a wide circle, giving the scene the feel of something ceremonial, something public. Emma, still live-streaming, whispered into her phone's mic, "It's happening. They're about to apologize." Henderson cleared his throat, forcing a weak smile that faded as soon as he met Jack's calm, steady gaze. "Mr. Reynolds," he began, his voice tight, "I want to personally apologize for what happened today. There is no excuse, none for the disrespect you endured in this office. On behalf of our staff, our management, and the larger company, I am deeply sorry." Jack said nothing at first, standing quietly with his hands folded over the torn edge of his jacket. His eyes flicked once to Kyle, who shuffled forward under Henderson's prompting. Kyle's mouth opened, closed, then finally forced out the words, "I'm sorry, sir." Kyle mumbled his voice, barely above a whisper. "I was wrong. I didn't understand what that medal meant." Jack gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "You know, now," he said softly, his tone carrying no triumph, no gloating, only a kind of quiet gravity. Sam stood just behind his father, arms crossed, his sharp gaze sweeping over the staff and customers who watched in frozen silence. Henderson, still wringing his hands slightly, added quickly, "We've committed to making real changes. Mr. Reynolds' immediate staff training, a veteran appreciation policy, public acknowledgement. This will never happen again." Sir Jack raised his chin slightly, his voice steady and firm. "I don't need banners or speeches." He said, "I just need you to remember what respect looks like when a veteran or any person walks through that door." The silence that followed was not heavy with tension this time, but with something more reflective, almost somber. People shifted, nodding slightly, the mood in the room settling as the weight of the apology landed. Emma's live stream caught the faces around the room, some looking guilty, some simply thoughtful, all of them aware that they had witnessed something larger than an everyday office spat. With nothing more to say, Jack gave a small nod, turning slightly to Sam. Sam, in turn, placed a firm but gentle hand on his father's shoulder, guiding him toward the door. The crowd instinctively parted as the two men walked through, their heads held high, their backs straight. Not one voice rose to stop them, Not one person dared interrupt. Out in the parking lot, the fading light painted the ground in long gold and purple streaks. Jack paused by the car, his hand resting lightly on the door handle, and looked up at his son. His voice came out low-edged with lingering emotion. "You didn't have to do all this." Sam smiled faintly, reaching out to give his father's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "No, Dad," he said softly. "Some lines I don't let anyone cross. Not when it comes to you." Jack's throat tightened slightly, his eyes misting as he let out a long breath. "I'm proud of you, son," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Without another word, they slid into the car, the quiet closing in around them like a soft blanket. As the engine hummed to life, Jack let his hand rest gently over the bronze star in his lap, the metal cool under his fingers. Together they pulled away, leaving behind an office still reeling from the lesson it had just learned, a crowd still gathered in hushed awe, a staff still processing the cost of careless disrespect. And as father and son drove off into the approaching night, they left not as victims, not as fighters, but as two men who understood exactly what it meant to stand tall and to remind a whole room that some honors are never ever to be taken lightly. That evening, as the sun dipped fully below the horizon and the soft glow of streetlights took over the town, something remarkable began unfolding in places far beyond the North Point Public Service Office online. The ripples of the day's confrontation had surged into full-blown waves. Emma's live stream, which had captured every tense moment of the incident, was now being shared across multiple platforms: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, even local community boards. By the time she finally ended the stream, her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from pure adrenaline. "I didn't think it would blow up this big," she whispered to herself, staring at her screen as the view count shot past 1 million. Her phone buzzed non-stop with notifications, comments pouring in, reposts, multiplying major social media accounts, picking up the video. It had gone from a small local confrontation to something with national reach. In veteran forums and online military groups, the reaction was immediate and passionate. A popular veterans page reposted the clip with the caption, "This is what standing up for honor looks like." A lieutenant colonel teaching an entire office what respect means, watch until the end. The post racked up thousands of likes within minutes. Comments flooded in. "Damn." Right, one veteran wrote. "That's how you protect the people who protected you." Another chimed in, "This made me tear up. That old man carried more weight on his shoulders than half the people in that office ever will." Someone else shared, "We need more sons like that, and more fathers who stand with quiet dignity." The hashtags began trending. Honor matters. Shukchoik veteran respect. Real heroes. Military families shared the video alongside stories of their own, talking about medals tucked away in drawers. Fathers and mothers who never bragged but had earned the right to be respected. Even prominent veteran organizations began reposting the clip, calling for nationwide discussions on how public institutions should treat veterans. Local news stations picked up the story. First, North Point's evening broadcast ran a headline that splashed across the screen in bold text, "Lieutenant Colonel teaches local office a lesson in honor." The segment included an edited version of Emma's live stream, cutting between the clip of the medal being ripped away and the moment Sam Reynolds entered with his team. The voiceover described how swiftly the situation escalated, the military precision with which the colonel handled the confrontation, and the powerful apology that followed. By the next morning, larger news outlets began making calls. Reporters reached out to witnesses, to the Reynolds family, to the corporate office overseeing the service branch. A national paper drafted a feature article with the headline, "When Honor is Tested." The day a son stood for his father. Underneath a subtitle read, "What happened when a veteran's medal was torn away and the military showed up." Among the thousands of comments under Emma's original post, one in particular began rising to the top, liked and reshared by viewers who felt the weight of the moment. "Watched this twice," an older commenter wrote, his profile showing a black and white photo of himself in uniform from decades past. "I'm a Vietnam vet. I never thought I'd see something like this go public. Watching that young man stand for his father, it made me cry." Other users responded quickly. "Thank you for your service, sir," one person replied. Another added, "You deserve the same respect that man fought for today." Meanwhile, inside his quiet home, Jack Reynolds sat in a worn armchair, the house dim, except for a small lamp at his side. His torn jacket hung neatly on a nearby chair, the bronze star now resting carefully in a polished wooden box on the table next to him. The metal had been cleaned and repinned, the fabric stitched up by Sam himself before they returned home. Jack wasn't a man of technology, but tonight, curiosity pulled him to the laptop his son had set up for him years ago. With slow, careful hands, he opened the screen, clicked into the browser, and searched his own name. It was everywhere. Headlines, articles, videos. His face frozen mid-expression as he held his metal Sam's towering figure beside him, calm and commanding. The two of them walking out of the office, heads high after the apology had been delivered, Jack scrolled slowly, reading snippets of comments. "This is what dignity looks like. A reminder that veterans deserve better. We need to teach our kids about men like Jack Reynolds." Jack exhaled softly, his lips twitching upward in the faintest of smiles. He leaned back slightly, rubbing his thumb over the edge of the armrest, his eyes a little misty but his heart steady. He never sought attention. He never wanted applause. But seeing so many strangers, so many voices rising up to say, "This matters," it stirred something deep inside, something he hadn't expected to feel. From the kitchen doorway, Sam leaned casually against the frame, arms crossed, watching his father with a quiet smile. "Looks like you've gone viral, Dad," he said gently. Jack gave a low chuckle, shaking his head. "I'm not sure I even know what that means, son." Sam walked over, resting a hand lightly on Jack's shoulder. "It means people saw what happened, and they care." For a moment they sat in companionable silence, the glow of the screen reflecting softly off the walls. Jack turned his gaze back to the comments, his eyes landing on one that read, "Watching. This reminded me of my own father. I miss him every day. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds, for standing tall." Jack's throat tightened slightly, his hand brushing quickly across his eyes before he murmured, "Not bad for an old man, huh?" Sam grinned. "Not bad at all, Dad." Outside the window, the night deepened, the stars just beginning to appear overhead. Inside, father and son remained side by side, not seeking fame, not chasing headlines, but simply resting in the quiet knowledge that the strength they carried in medals and memories, in the simple act of standing up when it mattered, had reached farther than they ever expected. And as the last notifications pinged softly on the laptop, Jack leaned back with a small, contented sigh, knowing that the world had just learned a lesson that had been a lifetime in the making. That night, the Reynolds house was quiet, resting in the soft embrace of the late evening. The outside world, the viral videos, the news headlines, the buzzing comment sections was distant, now muffled by the sturdy walls of a home that had seen decades of quiet resilience. Inside, the lights were low, the rooms still, the air calm. In the dining room, the table had been cleared, the plates washed and put away, and the last trace of the long, emotional day reduced to a single object resting at the table's center, the bronze star. It sat neatly on its small stand, freshly polished, the fabric behind it, repaired with careful, almost reverent hands. Jack stood near the window, his silhouette framed softly against the glow of the streetlights outside. His hands were tucked loosely behind his back. His posture relaxed, his eyes distant as he gazed out into the night. Behind him, the faint creak of a floorboard marked Sam's quiet entrance into the room, but neither man spoke. Words, after all, were no longer needed. On the wall to Jack's right hung a framed black and white photograph, a younger Jack in uniform, his wife beside him, one arm wrapped around her, the other holding an infant, Sam. Time had yellowed the edges of the frame, but the image inside remained sharp, a reminder of all the years that had passed, all the stories that had built the life they stood in. Now Jack's gaze lowered slowly to the metal on the table. his lips pressing into a thoughtful line. His fingers brushed lightly across the repaired lapel of his jacket, feeling the faint ridge where the fabric had been stitched. He exhaled a slow, steady breath, his shoulders rising and falling with quiet finality. Behind him, Sam remained still, giving his father the space to reflect. There was no more confrontation, no more speeches, no more need for explanations. What had been said was said. What had been defended was defended. The world had seen and the point had been made. Jack turned slightly, his eyes meeting the metal once more, and with a gentle, deliberate motion, he reached forward, lifting it carefully from its stand. He held it in his hand for a moment, his thumb tracing the familiar shape, then walked slowly toward the small cabinet at the edge of the room. He opened it, revealing a row of items tucked away over the years, old service ribbons, folded letters, framed commendations, with the quiet reverence of a man handling something far greater than metal or cloth. Jack placed the bronze star into the cabinet, settling it among the other tokens of a life of service. He stood there for a moment longer, his eyes soft but unwavering before closing the door gently. As the camera of the scene might have pulled back if anyone had been watching, the image would be simple, almost serene. A man standing alone in the quiet of his home, his son nearby, the noise and chaos of the world outside finally silenced by the walls they had built together. There were no more cameras, no more reporters, no more crowds, just the quiet dignity of a man who had weathered the years, and the new strength of a son who had stood up when it mattered. Outside, the wind stirred softly through the trees, brushing past the windows and moving down the empty street. Inside, the last light flickered faintly before being switched off the room, falling into a peaceful hush. And so the house settled into its nighttime stillness, the world turning gently on without fanfare, and within it 2 men, father and son, resting in the quiet knowledge that some honors live quietly. Not on a public stage, but here in the small, steadfast spaces where love, memory, and respect endure. The days that followed turned the Reynolds story from a local confrontation into a nationwide reflection. On social media, the clip of Jack's medal being torn away and the powerful response led by his son Sam spread like wildfire, surpassing millions of views. Veteran groups across the country reposted the video, adding their own messages of solidarity, each one reminding their followers that this was not just an isolated moment of anger or apology, it was a reminder of something much deeper. Posts popped up under hashtags like Nox Honor Matters and Veteran Respect on every major platform. A Marine veteran page shared it with the caption, "Remember, this medal carries more than metal. It carries stories, blood, sacrifice." Another Army spouses group reposted it, writing, "This is why we stand by our service members even decades after they leave the uniform." On YouTube, reaction videos appeared overnight. Young creators and old veterans alike filmed themselves watching Emma's original live stream, their expressions shifting from outrage to respect as they saw Sam's disciplined, unwavering confrontation. One elderly Navy vet, tears glimmering in his eyes, said simply into the camera, "I never thought I'd live to see this kind of public respect shown so powerfully again." That clip alone drew hundreds of thousands of comments. The newspapers, both local and national, ran headlines that echoed a common theme. When honor stood its ground. A family's lesson to the nation. Op-eds appeared calling for businesses and institutions to rethink how they train their staff, how they honor veterans, and how they recognize quiet sacrifice when it walks through their doors. The conversation widened from one office to the national stage, and the ripples kept spreading. But beyond the viral numbers, the shares, and the headlines, a more important current ran through the public conversation. Reflection online forums were filled with people sharing their own stories of parents, grandparents, siblings, and friends who had served quietly, who had tucked medals away in boxes, who had faced moments of disrespect or invisibility. One user wrote, "My grandfather was in Korea. He never talks about it, but when I saw this video I thought about him. Maybe it's time I thanked him properly." Another posted, "I've seen people mistreated like this before. I never said anything." This video made me realize I can't stay silent next time. Slowly, the viral moment became more than just entertainment or outrage. It became a collective mirror. The hook began to appear in comments, news anchors' closing lines, and podcast discussions. Have you ever witnessed someone being disrespected? Did you stand up or did you look away? For every angry or defensive comment online, there were 10 more expressing gratitude, admiration, and a quiet resolve to do better. People weren't just clicking like or share, they were stopping to ask themselves what they stood for, what they might have overlooked, and how they could carry the lesson forward into their own daily lives. The final message that emerged was simple, powerful, and echoed across screens and conversations alike. Honor is not for sale. It cannot be bought, and it cannot be stolen without a fight. Those who stand up to defend it keep the fire alive, not just for themselves, but for everyone watching. As the clip continued to circulate, now embedded in articles shared in family chats and replayed in schools and community centers, the world was left with a lasting question, one that reached out beyond military circles, beyond age, beyond borders. Have you ever witnessed someone being shamed, belittled, or dismissed? And if you did, what did you do? Did you stand up or did you stay silent? The screen faded slowly to black, the final words appearing in clear, steady text. If you believe in the power of honor, family, and standing up when it matters most, share this story. Honor. It is a word we hear, or often, but do we truly understand the weight it carries? For Jack Reynolds, it wasn't about medals displayed on a shelf or stories recounted at family dinners. It was about the quiet memory of brothers who didn't make it home. The scars, both visible and invisible. The silent pact that those who served never truly leave the battlefield. They carry it within every day, in every step. For Sam Reynolds, honor meant standing up when no one else would. When his father, a man who had faced down enemy fire decades ago, was shamed not by a battlefield adversary, but by carelessness, arrogance, and a system that had forgotten its duty to those who served. What unfolded in that local office wasn't just a family matter or a single employee's misstep. It was a spark, one that reignited a conversation across the nation about respect, accountability, and the quiet power of doing what's right, even when no one asks you to. As the story spread, it became clear that this moment had touched something deeper in people. It wasn't just about Jack or Sam, or the bystanders who watched in stunned silence. It was about every person who has ever watched someone they care about be dismissed, belittled, or hurt, and the choice we all have in that instant: look away or stand up. This story reminds us that honor is not a relic of the past. It is alive today in every small act of respect, every word of gratitude, every time we choose to defend the dignity of another human being. Whether in the military, in a workplace, in a school, or in the quiet corners of our communities, standing up for others matters. It shapes who we are, and it defines the world we leave behind. So now we turn the question to you. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone was disrespected or dismissed, and did you stand up for them or stay silent? What does honor mean in your life, and how do you carry it forward in the everyday choices you make? We want to hear your stories. Drop a comment below, share your thoughts, and tell us, what does standing up for what's right look like to you? If this story moved you, if you believe that honor and family still have a place in today's world, don't let it stop here. Like this video, share it with your friends and loved ones, and hit that subscribe button to join us for more true stories that remind us all of the values that matter most. Because sometimes the quietest acts echo the loudest, and when we share them, we keep those echoes alive for generations to come.